Number 1, Maureen McDonnell. She was a former First Lady of Virginia and once at the center of one of the most high-profile corruption cases in recent history. It all began in 2011 when she and her husband, Governor Bob McDonnell, became involved with Johnny Williams, the CEO of Star Scientific. Williams provided them with gifts, loans, and vacations, all in exchange for political favors, specifically pushing his tobacco-based health supplement, Block. The McDonnell's actions raised suspicions, and in 2014, Maureen was indicted on multiple corruption charges. Her trial was full of twists, with both sides presenting heated arguments. Ultimately, in 2014, Maureen McDonnell was convicted on 8 counts, including conspiracy to commit honest services wire fraud. The public was stunned as the First Lady of Virginia faced the reality of a criminal conviction. Bob McDonnell, as Virginia's governor, was also deeply embroiled in the scandal. While he was convicted on similar charges, his case became even more complicated. In 2016, his conviction was overturned by the U.S. Supreme Court, which ruled that the charges against him were not clear-cut. However, the damage to his political career was irreversible, and he faced significant public scrutiny. After the scandal, Bob McDonnell largely withdrew from the political scene, though his legal battles continued for years. And for Maureen, in February 2015, she was sentenced to 1 year and 1 day in federal prison, a sentence that would mark the start of a long chapter of personal and public fallout. As she entered prison, the media coverage continued to follow her every move. During this time, her marriage to Bob McDonnell, already under strain, eventually ended in divorce in 2018. Maureen McDonnell's release came after serving nearly 8 months of her sentence, when she was granted early release in late 2015. Since then, she has kept a relatively low profile. Reports indicated that she has focused on her personal life, trying to rebuild the pieces of her life that were shattered by the scandal. She has expressed regret over the entire ordeal and has stayed out of the public eye, away from politics and media attention. As of 2025, Maureen McDonnell continues to live in Virginia, having completed her sentence and seemingly moved on from the scandal that once defined her. Her story serves as a poignant chapter in American political history, a reminder of the long-lasting consequences that corruption can have on not just the politician involved, but their entire family and public life. Number 2, Corrine Brown. She was a powerful force in Florida politics for over 2 decades, serving as a U.S. representative for Florida's 5th District from 1993 to 2017. As one of the first African-American women elected to Congress from Florida, Brown's influence stretched across Jacksonville and its surrounding communities. She was known for her advocacy on civil rights, social justice, and public education. However, her political career took a devastating turn when she became embroiled in a federal fraud case that would ultimately end her time in Congress. The case against her centered around the One Door for Education Foundation, a nonprofit organization she created to purportedly help underserved students by providing scholarships. Over the years, Brown and her associates raised more than $800,000 in donations for the foundation, promising to use the funds for educational purposes. But as federal investigators uncovered, much of the money never reached the students. Instead, it was funneled into Brown's personal expenses. Lavish parties, shopping trips, concert tickets, and even a dog's birthday party were funded using the charity's donations. Less than $2,000 of the $800,000 was actually used for scholarships. In 2017, after a lengthy investigation, Brown was convicted on 18 of 22 charges, including mail and wire fraud, tax evasion, and concealing income. The scandal shocked her supporters and colleagues, as many had trusted her to act in the best interest of the community. Brown's actions had not only violated the public's trust, but had also misused the charitable contributions intended for those most in need. In 2017, after her conviction, Brown was sentenced to 5 years in prison in order to pay restitution for the stolen funds. However, due to concerns about her health, she was released in 2020 after serving part of her sentence under the conditions of the COVID-19 pandemic. But the story didn't end there. In 2022, Brown's legal battles continued when an appeals court vacated her original conviction. She pleaded guilty to one charge of obstructing the administration of internal revenue laws, admitting that she had misled federal authorities. The court sentenced her to time served with an additional restitution payment of over $62,000. Brown's case became a cautionary tale about the dangers of abusing public office. It highlighted the need for greater transparency, accountability, and oversight of nonprofit organizations and public servants. The misuse of funds for personal gain not only cost Brown her political career, but also tarnished the integrity of her legacy in Congress. Number 3, Jane Orie.
When I look back, Wendy, there's 4 females in his family, 3 daughters and a niece that have been arrested 6 times over a course of 3 years.
Jane was once a prominent figure in Pennsylvania politics, serving as a Republican state senator for the 40th District from 2001 until 2012. Representing parts of Allegheny and Butler counties, Orie quickly became known for her strong conservative stance and her role as majority whip in the state Senate. She was seen as a rising star, a politician with a promising future ahead of her. However, her career came to a screeching halt when she was implicated in a series of criminal activities that would ultimately lead to her downfall. The investigation into Orie's actions began in 2010 when a grand jury in Allegheny County uncovered evidence that she had been using her state-funded legislative staff for political purposes. Orie had directed her staff to carry out campaign activities for herself and her sister, Joan Orie Melvin, who was running for the Pennsylvania Supreme Court at the time. Orie's staffers were found to have spent state work hours on campaign-related tasks, including fundraising and political strategy. This was a clear violation of state ethics laws, and it sparked a full investigation into her conduct. The case grew even more complicated when it was revealed that Orie and her defense team had submitted forged documents during the trial. This led to a mistrial in 2011, and the court strongly criticized her actions, calling them a flagrant and disgraceful violation of her oath as a lawyer. The situation was becoming more and more serious, and the public began to question the integrity of a politician who had once been held in high regard. In 2012, the legal system caught up with Orie. She was convicted on 14 counts, including theft of services, conflict of interest, and forgery. The charges stemmed from her abuse of state resources for personal political gain and the subsequent attempt to cover up her actions with falsified documents. On June 5th, 2012, she was sentenced to a prison term of 2.5 to 10 years. The judge in her case, Jeffrey Manning, didn't mince words. He emphasized the gravity of the crimes, stating that they demean the sanctity of all we do as lawyers. Before her sentencing, Orie resigned from her Senate seat, effectively ending her political career. She was then sent to the Cambridge Springs State Correctional Institution, where she served her sentence. In February 2014, Orie was released after serving the minimum portion of her sentence. But the consequences of her actions didn't stop there. In 2014, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court disbarred her, stripping her of her law license and effectively ending any future legal career she might have had. And for her sister, Joan Orie Melvin, who had been serving as a judge on the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, was also implicated in the misuse of state resources for campaign purposes. In 2013, Melvin was convicted on multiple charges, including theft of services and conspiracy, and she was sentenced to house arrest and probation. She too was forced to resign from the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. The cases of Jane Orie and her sister Joan serve as a sobering reminder of the consequences of public corruption. Not only did their actions cost them their careers and reputations, but they also eroded the public's trust in the political institutions they once represented. Number 4, Cristina Fernández de Kirchner, the former president and the current president of the Justicialist Party, Argentina's main opposition party, has been at the center of one of the country's most high-profile corruption cases. Her political career, once marked by significant achievements and a strong political following, took a sharp turn when she became embroiled in a massive scandal involving public works contracts. The case, known as the Vialidad case, accused Fernández de Kirchner of directing state funds to companies owned by Lázaro Báez, an associate and businessman with close ties to her family. During her presidency from 2007 to 2015, Báez's companies were allegedly awarded inflated contracts to carry out public works projects, which were later discovered to be part of a fraudulent scheme that siphoned off hundreds of millions of dollars from the state. In December 2022, after a lengthy investigation and trial, Fernández de Kirchner was convicted for her role in the corruption scheme. The court sentenced her to 6 years in prison, along with a lifetime ban from holding public office. This conviction was based on the evidence presented during the trial, including testimonies from witnesses and documentation that linked her directly to the fraudulent activities. The ruling marked a significant moment in Argentina's fight against corruption at the highest levels of government. However, the legal proceedings did not end there. In June 2025, Argentina's Supreme Court upheld her conviction, confirming the 6-year prison sentence and the ban from holding public office. Despite the ruling, Fernández de Kirchner remained a powerful figure in Argentine politics, with a large portion of the population continuing to support her. Her political influence, especially in the context of her vice presidential role, has remained a point of debate and division within the country. Due to her health and age, Fernández de Kirchner was granted house arrest, and she began serving her sentence under these conditions in mid-2025. This move sparked further discussions about the treatment of high-ranking officials during legal proceedings and the balance between political power and legal accountability. The Fernández de Kirchner case has been a focal point in Argentina's political and legal landscape. It has highlighted the ongoing challenges of prosecuting powerful public figures and the complexities that come with such high-profile legal battles. The case also continues to fuel conversations about political corruption, transparency, and accountability in Argentina, as the country grapples with its history of corruption at the highest levels. Number 5, Dianne Wilkerson.
I will accept my punishment, but it doesn't change the fact that I knew from the beginning of the tactics utilized against Chuck Turner and I by local and federal law enforcement, purportedly to weed out corruption.
She was a trailblazer in Massachusetts politics. In 1993, she made history by becoming the first African-American woman elected to the Massachusetts State Senate, representing the 2nd Suffolk District, which includes the neighborhoods of Roxbury and Dorchester. Throughout her time in office, Wilkerson was known for her advocacy on behalf of marginalized communities, focusing on issues such as affordable housing, education, and economic justice. She built a reputation as a strong voice for those who often felt left behind in the political process. But beneath the surface of her career, Wilkerson's story took a dark turn. In 2008, the FBI launched an investigation into allegations of public corruption, which would eventually bring her political career to a screeching halt. She was caught in a wide-ranging sting operation that exposed her accepting bribes from an undercover businessman seeking favors. Over the course of 16 months, she accepted $23,500 in cash, which she pocketed in exchange for using her political influence to benefit the businessman's nightclub project in Roxbury. The turning point came when FBI agents, posing as corrupt businessmen, captured Wilkerson on camera stuffing cash into her bra during a meeting at a Boston restaurant. The image of her hiding the bribe was widely circulated, symbolizing the extent of the betrayal she had committed against the people who had trusted her. In 2010, Wilkerson pleaded guilty to 8 counts of attempted extortion, admitting to using her official position to extort money. As part of a plea deal, the other related charges were dropped. She was sentenced in January 2011 to 42 months, or just over 3 years, in federal prison. The judge emphasized the seriousness of her crimes, pointing out her previous conviction for federal tax evasion in the 1990s and her long history of ethical lapses. Wilkerson served her sentence at the Federal Correctional Institution in Danbury, Connecticut, and was released in September 2013. Upon her release, she didn't completely disappear from the public eye. Instead, she turned to community activism, focusing on the very communities she had once represented. She worked to rebuild her reputation by engaging in efforts to address issues impacting Black and Latino communities in Boston. In 2022, she made an attempt to return to politics by running for her old Senate seat. Despite her efforts and her long history of political involvement, Wilkerson's bid was unsuccessful as she failed to win the Democratic primary. Number 6, Pamela Harris. Pamela Harris, a former New York State assemblywoman, once held a respected position in her community. Elected to represent the 46th district, which includes neighborhoods like Coney Island and Bay Ridge, Harris was a public figure with a history of overcoming personal challenges. Born and raised in Brooklyn, she worked as a correction officer at Rikers Island before becoming deeply involved in community activism. She ran a nonprofit organization, Coney Island Generation Gap, focusing on helping young people and those impacted by Hurricane Sandy. But her political career took a drastic turn when she was involved in a series of fraudulent activities that would eventually lead to her downfall. Between 2012 and 2017, she engaged in multiple schemes to defraud both federal and city agencies. The most egregious of these was a scam involving disaster relief funds. Harris falsely claimed that she had been displaced by Hurricane Sandy, submitting fake lease agreements and rent receipts to FEMA. As a result, she illegally pocketed nearly $25,000 in disaster relief funds meant for victims of the storm. Not only that, Harris also misused over $45,000 of city funds intended for her nonprofit organization. Rather than using the funds to help the community as they were intended, she diverted the money for personal expenses. These included things like shopping bills, mortgage payments, and travel, all of which were far removed from the mission of her organization. As if that wasn't enough, she attempted to cover her tracks by pressuring others to lie to federal investigators. She was accused of witness tampering, trying to obstruct justice in the process of the investigation. In June 2018, Harris pleaded guilty to several charges: 2 counts of wire fraud, 1 count of making false statements to FEMA, and 1 count of witness tampering. By October of the same year, she was sentenced to 6 months in federal prison, 400 hours of community service, and ordered to pay restitution totaling $70,400. Harris reported to the Alderson Federal Prison Camp in West Virginia in December 2018, where she served out her sentence. She was released in June 2019. Since then, she has kept a relatively low profile. Number 7, Carter Peterson. She was a former Louisiana state senator, once held a position of great influence in the state's political landscape. Serving in the Louisiana legislature for over 20 years, Peterson was a prominent figure in both local and national politics. As chair of the Louisiana Democratic Party, she had built a reputation as a dedicated public servant and advocate for her community. But behind the scenes, Peterson was struggling with a personal battle that would ultimately lead to her fall from grace. In 2022, she made a shocking announcement. She was resigning from the state Senate. She attributed her decision to depression and a long-standing gambling addiction, but it was later revealed that her resignation was connected to a much larger issue. Peterson had been using her political position to misappropriate funds for personal gain. Federal investigators uncovered that over the course of several years, Peterson had diverted more than $140,000 in campaign funds and state party money for her own use. She admitted to cashing checks drawn from both her re-election campaign account and the state Democratic Party's account, funneling the proceeds into her gambling activities. It was a clear violation of the trust placed in her by the public and her constituents. By January 2023, Peterson faced the consequences of her actions. She pled guilty to wire fraud, and a federal judge sentenced her to 22 months in prison. In addition to her prison term, she was ordered to pay restitution of over $53,000 and a substantial fine of $115,000. The judge also imposed 3 years of supervised release once she completed her sentence, and Peterson was required to perform 600 hours of community service. During her sentencing, she expressed deep remorse for her actions. She acknowledged that she had failed her constituents, her family, and everyone who had placed their trust in her. It was a somber moment as the woman who had once been a leader in the state Senate faced the consequences of her choices. After her resignation in 2022 and the conclusion of her legal proceedings, Peterson has kept a low profile but has remained involved in political activities. She attended the 2024 Democratic National Convention and continued working as an advisor at DeVilla Law Group. This is a sobering reminder of how personal struggles can intersect with public service and the serious repercussions that can arise when those in power misuse their positions. Number 8, Vanessa L. Brown. Vanessa was a former Pennsylvania state representative, once stood as a powerful figure in the state's political scene, serving the 191st District in Philadelphia from 2009 to 2018. Brown was a member of the Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus and worked tirelessly on behalf of her constituents. With a background in community organizing, she had built a reputation for advocating for the underserved and promoting social change. But beneath the surface of this dedicated public servant lay a story of betrayal and corruption that would ultimately change her career for life. In 2018, Brown's career came crashing down after she was convicted of bribery. The charges stemmed from a sting operation in which she was caught accepting bribes from a government informant posing as a lobbyist. Over the course of several meetings, Brown took 5 cash payments totaling $4,000, agreeing to introduce legislation that would benefit the informant's alleged clients. This act of betrayal, a breach of the public trust, was captured on tape, leading to her conviction. On November 30th, 2018, after a lengthy legal process, Brown was sentenced to 23 months of probation and ordered to pay the $4,000 back to the state. While the punishment didn't include jail time, the emotional and political fallout was significant. She was the 6th Black elected official from Philadelphia to face legal consequences linked to the sting operation, which had targeted various public officials across the state. Initially, Brown resisted calls to resign, despite the severity of her conviction. However, under mounting pressure, she announced her resignation on December 11, 2018, stating she was stepping down under protest. While she didn't admit guilt outright, she acknowledged the weight of the situation and chose to leave her position. It was a humbling moment for a politician who had once been at the forefront of her community's battles. After leaving office, Brown found work as a community outreach coordinator in the Office of the Register of Wills in Philadelphia, showing that, despite her fall from grace, she was still committed to serving the community in some capacity. Her resignation and subsequent career shift marked the end of a chapter, but not the end of her life in the public eye. Number 9, Fariba Vancor. She was once a prominent figure in Sweden's waste management industry and at the same time in the center of one of the country's most shocking environmental scandals. As the CEO of Think Pink, a waste disposal company, Vancor was trusted with managing one of Sweden's most sensitive tasks, handling hazardous waste. However, her role in a massive illegal dumping operation would eventually lead to her downfall. tarnishing her reputation and changing Sweden's approach to environmental law. Between 2015 and 2020, Vancor's company illegally dumped approximately 200,000 tons of toxic waste across 21 sites in central Sweden. The waste, which included hazardous substances like PCBs, mercury, lead, arsenic, and other metals, was carelessly disposed of in areas near water protection zones, residential neighborhoods, and protected coastal regions. These toxic substances pose severe risks not only to the environment, but also to public health. The scheme came to light after several major incidents, including large-scale fires at some of Think Pink's dumping sites. The fires released toxic smoke, which spread across nearby communities, causing widespread alarm and triggering investigations into the company's operations. It was soon revealed that this was not just an isolated case of negligence. It was a systemic issue that had been ongoing for years, affecting the surrounding environment in devastating ways. In the courtroom, Vancor and 10 others were charged in connection with the illegal dumping operation. The case was described as a pyramid scheme of environmental crimes, with Vancor at the top of the chain. Her actions were seen as a blatant abuse of power, driven by greed and a complete disregard for the health of the public and the protection of the environment. In 2025, Vancor was sentenced to 6 years in prison for her role in the illegal dumping scandal. The sentence was one of the longest handed down in Sweden for environmental crimes, underscoring the severity of her actions. Several other individuals involved in the scheme also received sentences ranging from 2 to 6 years, though Vancor received the longest penalty due to her leadership role in the operation. Vancor and her co-defendants denied the charges, and her legal team announced plans to appeal the verdict. However, the case has sparked widespread discussions about corporate responsibility, environmental oversight, and the enforcement of laws designed to protect public health and the environment. The Think Pink case has shone a spotlight on the need for stronger environmental protections and more rigorous oversight of waste management companies to ensure that something like this never happens again. Number 10, Elizabeth Holmes.
We've made it possible to run comprehensive laboratory tests from a tiny sample or a few drops of blood to eliminate the tubes and tubes of blood that traditionally have to be drawn from an arm and replaced it with the nanotank.
Elizabeth, once hailed as the female Steve Jobs, she was the founder and CEO of Theranos, a biotech company that promised to revolutionize blood testing. With her ambition to make medical diagnostics faster, cheaper, and less invasive, she quickly became a Silicon Valley darling. At its peak, Theranos was valued at $9 billion, and Holmes, at just 30 years old, was considered one of the youngest self-made billionaires in history. But her rise was built on a lie. Theranos claimed to have developed a device that could run hundreds of tests using just a few drops of blood. It seemed like the breakthrough the medical world had been waiting for. Holmes appeared on the covers of magazines, giving TED Talks, and even meeting with high-profile figures like former U.S. Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis and former U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger. But beneath the surface, the technology was not working as promised. Whistleblowers within the company and investigative journalists began to uncover the truth. The device didn't work, and the company had manipulated test results to make it appear as though it did. Theranos used traditional machines to run many of their tests, misrepresenting their capabilities to investors, patients, and doctors. Holmes and her team, including former Theranos COO Ramesh Sunny Balwani, continued to push the company forward even as they knew the technology was flawed. In 2018, after a lengthy investigation and a series of exposés, Elizabeth Holmes and Sunny Balwani were charged with wire fraud and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. The charges stemmed from their misleading statements to investors and patients about the capabilities of Theranos' blood testing technology. Holmes faced 11 counts of fraud, and the trial began in 2021. After months of legal proceedings in January 2022, Holmes was convicted on 4 counts of defrauding investors, totaling millions of dollars. The jury found that she had intentionally misled investors by exaggerating the capabilities of her technology. She was sentenced to 11 years and 3 months in federal prison. However, in 2023, her sentence was reduced to 9 years due to good behavior, and she began serving her time at federal prison camp Bryan in Texas. Holmes maintains that while Theranos failed, it was not fraud. She expressed remorse for the impact her actions had on patients and investors, but insisted that her intentions were always to create a groundbreaking company. Still, the legal system found her guilty of criminal conduct, and her case became a cautionary tale about ambition, deception, and the dangers of Silicon Valley's cult of personality. Holmes will serve her sentence until 2032, and her story continues to serve as a powerful reminder of how the line between innovation and deception can blur in the high-stakes world of technology and venture capital. Her rise and fall are a stark illustration of the perils of putting unchecked faith in a charismatic founder and the importance of holding individuals accountable for their actions, no matter their status or wealth. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support means a lot and helps me keep bringing you more content.